I started my channel under a year ago now, and I've been incredibly fortunate to see a lot of growth. However, since the beginning, there's been one video idea I've always had at the back of my mind, but I've been putting it off because, frankly, it's one of the few subjects in the fandom that needs to be handled with a lot of care. However, I feel it is now time I voice my opinion, and it is of course just that, an opinion, and say what I feel needs to be said. So please subscribe to boost my ego, and let's talk about some very controversial Great Western engines. The adult Thomas and Friends fandom loves Duck. And, frankly, I don't know why. Everyone is hyped beyond belief whenever he appears. When he had a speaking role in Lost Treasure, people seemed almost as excited by that as they did by the stunning visuals and music and the writing. And that's just weird to me. Now, don't get me wrong, Duck is by no means a bad character. He's one of the original 8, he's had some good episodes, his dynamic with Percy is great, but people just obsess over him when he doesn't have the strongest character. Before we go any further, I am aware that a lot of people are incredibly passionate about how great of a character Duck is, and it has caused disputes in the fandom before. Thankfully, I do think the subject is a lot more peaceful now than a couple of years ago, but even so, I do just want to say that you are entitled to your opinion, and I am entitled to mine. So, let's get back on topic. Part 1. Why do people love Duck? This is a question I've actually had a few sleepless nights over. Why do people love Duck? To be honest, I think that one of the reasons Duck has one of the biggest fan bases of any character is that he was absent for so long. Time for a history lesson, folks. Duck was introduced in the 11th Railway Series book, Percy the Small Engine. As the title suggests, the book is about Percy. However, Duck still plays a major role, confronting the big engines and essentially helping Percy grow up a bit. One thing to note is that this book was published all the way back in 1956. Remember that, it'll be important later. Across the rest of the Railway series, we saw plenty of Duck. The main example, of course, is Duck and the Diesel Engine, but he made appearances elsewhere, and, at least early in the series, was certainly part of the main cast. However, as the series progressed, we saw less and less of Duck. The last time he was really in the spotlight was in Enterprising Engines, and even then, he was just in a whimsical story that felt much more like filler in such an epic book. When Christopher continued the series, it became obvious that he had basically nothing to say about Duck. Duck features in 2 or 3 stories here or there, but by this point, he was much more of a secondary character, like Mavis or the Scottish Twins or something. Of course though, by this time the TV series had begun. The first 4 seasons stuck very closely to the books, and so Duck retained most of his roles there. However, by this point it was 1995. That's almost 40 years after Duck's first appearance, and as the TV show started to make its own stories, Duck began to slowly disappear. Not completely, but a process had certainly begun. Season 5, Duck had no lead roles. Season 6, a couple of appearances, but still no lead roles. Season 7, Duck was basically gone by this point, and by the time he reached Season 9, he's vanished altogether. The truth was that Duck's last proper appearance was in Season 4, and other than a couple of very fleeting appearances in the later hit era, he'd been forgotten altogether. Let's jump forward another few years. Now, it's 2013. It's been 18 years since Duck led an episode, and almost 6 decades since he was first introduced in the books. The point I really want to stress here is that Duck was almost exclusively from the Railway series stories, and so people began to associate him less and less with the show, and more with the books. And then, on the 1st of October 2013, the unthinkable happens. Season 17, Episode 12, featuring Thomas, Harold, and... wait, what? Duck was back, and this, in my opinion, was when Duck's fanbase really started to grow, all those years after his introduction. Because Duck was so associated with the books, people saw his return as the herald of a new age for Thomas. Season 17, under new writers, was already showing signs of improvement, but to see Duck, a character that hadn't had a major role for 18 years, return was certainly a wind of change. And in my opinion, people started to see Duck less and less as a character and more as a sign of good things. Almost like an angel sent by Mattel to say, everything's going to be fine, the series is good again. And the weird thing is, I'm only slightly exaggerating. As Duck was featured more and more, everything else could wait. People started to praise Duck's appearance more and more as they forgot what the character really meant. Over time, particularly across seasons 18 and 19, this built to a peak. And that, with a few extra steps, leads us on to where we are today. Duck probably won't appear in the reboot, and frankly I couldn't care less whether he does or not, but my point is that I think that's how we got to the massive Duck fanbase we have today. Do you see how Duck evolved from just a fine and alright character to someone being treated almost like a god? Now of course I'm not saying that all Duck fans are hero worshipping him like an idol, but there's certainly an element of that in some of the stuff I've seen. So that's my theory on how Duck got to the fanbase he has today. But hey, that's just a theory, a Thomas theory. Who am I kidding? Let's get into what this video is all about. Part 2. Why Oliver is better. So, although many people love Duck almost fanatically, people always seem to forget Oliver. And Oliver, in my opinion, is the true Great Western MVP. Him and Duck seem somewhat similar at first, matching paint, both Great Westerners, etc., but they couldn't be more different. Now, I will just mention that Oliver was somewhat fangirled over during the Brenner era, perhaps for similar reasons as Duck. However, he had major roles in Season 5, and even in Seasons 7 and 12 to an extent. The same is true of Donald and Douglas, for example, who had roles in Seasons 6, 7 and 11. However, neither Oliver nor the twins had the same mass following as Duck had. And yet, Oliver is a better character. Notice how I state that almost as a fact. Now, I do say almost there, because everyone can have an opinion on who they like more, of course. But when we look at the facts of writing, the principles of character development, Oliver is a much stronger and deeper character than Duck is. Why? Let's go over 2 reasons. First of all, Oliver is a better written character because he has a much stronger arc. Now, I don't want to go over this one too much because, in all honesty, it's very easy to understand. I think what I'll do is I'll just explain their arcs side by side and see if you can spot the difference. Here goes. Duck's arc goes something like this. Duck, or Montague to use his full name, is bought by the Fat Controller and is teased by the big engines, leading to a confrontation. A diesel shunter then arrives on Sodor and gets Duck sent away through telling lies. However, Duck stops a runaway train and is brought back to Tidmouth. And now, let's look at Oliver's. Oliver runs away from his old railway because he knows the time of steam is over. He hides away as a fugitive but escapes to Sodor with Douglas. He then gets a big head and is violently pushed down a turntable by some trucks. The trucks tease him and are verging on a full rebellion when Oliver quells it by ripping their gang leader to literal shreds. Now, did you see the difference? Here it is. In Duck's case, things happen to Duck. In Oliver's case, Oliver makes things happen around him and then has to deal with the consequences. My point is that except for a few examples, Duck doesn't really drive his own story forward. He helps Percy, but that's only necessary for Percy to grow in confidence. It doesn't make Duck grow himself. When Diesel arrives, it's Diesel who is the catalyst for the events that follow, due to him being such a revolutionary jerk. Duck's story is driven forward by other characters. However, Oliver pushes his own story forward. It's a beautiful example of the butterfly effect. He runs away, and then has to deal with the very real possibility that he might get caught. He escapes with Douglas, who, interestingly, was also wants to stow away, and then has to adapt to his new life on Sodor as a result of that. He then gets very arrogant and has to deal with the trucks rebelling. He then has to deal with the consequences of that, and rips their gang leader to pieces. Every event in his story is made, changed, and moulded by him. I mean, sure, other characters do play roles. Douglas helps him escape, Gordon flatters him, Toad helps him with sanctioned murder, but at the end of the day, Oliver is the one facing the music. And that's the first reason why Oliver is a better character than Duck. The second reason is just as simple, and that's that Oliver has much better flaws than Duck. Duck's prominent flaw is that he's a little overproud of being Great Western. Other than that, he doesn't really have any standout flaws. In episodes where he supposedly learns a lesson, such as All at Sea, you could have subbed a lot of characters into Duck's place there, and the episode would still be great. However, let's take another non-OG example for Oliver. Oliver's find. We see that it wouldn't work with the likes of James or Thomas or Henry. Oliver causes his own accident, once again driving the story like we mentioned earlier, and as a result is put on the mail train. We see Oliver's key flaws in this episode, arrogance that gets him into accidents but doesn't demean others, as well as notable impatience issues. In addition, I'd argue we also see more subtle signs of Oliver being self-righteous. The accident at the beginning, or Harold being late later on, makes him feel like he's been personally wronged, and he gets annoyed and stuck up because of that. So, although Duck maybe has one flaw that sets him apart, Oliver has perhaps as many as 3 or 4. Flaws mean development, and development in turn creates a better character. So that's the second reason why Oliver is a better character than Duck. Well folks, that's my stance. Just a reminder here to keep comments friendly. I don't have a problem with people debating in my comments sections, but outright arguments aren't fun for anyone. This is a controversial topic for some strange reason, so let's just remember that both Duck and Oliver are both green smiley engines with faces. With that, thanks for watching, this has been the Thomas Cynic, and until the next time, have a good one.